Synthetic opioids, and specifically fentanyl, are the #1 causes of overdose in the United States today. When we look at the number of people who die annually from drug overdoses, it is now consistently over 100,000 per year. And the #1 drug that we're finding that is contaminated in all of these other drugs is fentanyl. It is the #1 cause of overdose in the United States right now. And we need to understand why and what to do about it. When we look at the basics of fentanyl, we find that it is what we call a synthetic opioid. It is a drug that has been around for a number of years that we use in places like the operating room or in the emergency department after somebody has a significant car accident or has a broken bone or has a gunshot. We use fentanyl in that situation. The problem is we now have this other subset of fentanyl called illicitly manufactured fentanyl that is very different from the medical grade fentanyl that we use in hospitals. So if we look at it in hospitals, it's made in a sterile factory and it's carefully blended. The dose is very precise and consistent. It's administered by doctors and nurses in a very specific way that we know the doses and we know how often we should give them. There are many legitimate uses for this medication, and death is really uncommon when it's taken as prescribed. However, the illicitly manufactured version of fentanyl is made in very unsanitary conditions. It has overtly random mixing, meaning that you can find on one side of one pill a completely different dose of fentanyl than on the other side of that pill. And the dose in any given pill or in any given liquid is going to be highly variable because there is no laboratory quality oversight for a drug dealer. It is hidden throughout the drug supply, meaning that we're finding it in things like THC vape cartridges, inside of methamphetamine bags, and consistently inside benzodiazepines that are illicitly manufactured. So you don't even know many times if you're taking it because it's not labeled, this is fentanyl. It can sit in many other drugs in all of the forms in which those drugs are taken. The reason this is out there is because it increases drug dealer profits, and it is clearly involved in the majority of US drug deaths in recent years. So how can illicitly manufactured fentanyl be ingested? Well, it can be ingested orally through illicitly manufactured pills. It can be snorted, it can be injected, and it can be smoked. One way that it's not ingested is it's not absorbed through the skin. This is mythology. We have fentanyl patches, and those can be placed on the skin, but they contain a specific chemical called a driver. That molecule is the only reason that fentanyl can get through the skin. But if I took fentanyl powder and I put it on my arm, it's not going to do anything. If I inhaled it, that's different, but it's not going to absorb through the skin. We're also finding that, as I stated earlier, it is found throughout all of the other drugs that are illicitly manufactured now, and it should be considered a contaminant in the entire drug supply. When we look at the basic realities of this, we have to know one pill can kill. And we know this because the potency of fentanyl is so much higher than morphine. If we look even at heroin here, this is the amount of heroin on the left side of the screen that an average person would need to overdose on and die. If we look on the right side of this, we see the amount of fentanyl. It's dust compared to the other one. And then as a part of the illicitly manufactured fentanyl, there's another chemical that sits in there called carfentanil. And it's even 100 times more potent than fentanyl. And one amount of it that's the size of a grain of sand can kill you. And so when the illicitly manufactured drugs are produced in a lab that looks like this, on equipment that looks like this, you can imagine that a little bit of dust or something the size of a grain of sand could be in a pill and somebody doesn't know it. And we're finding over and over and over again that people don't even know that they're taking fentanyl when they take a drug. If we look at some of the examples of this, we see what is a normal medical grade produced Xanax on the top left. Below it is a counterfeit fentanyl Xanax bar. these are not going to be recognizable by people who are not pharmacists, who don't see these things every day. It looks legitimate, and it could even be in a prescription Xanax bottle that somebody emptied out. So this is really problematic. And when we look at opioids, if somebody's at a party and they're like, oh, I'm going to take, some oxycodone, the one on the left is manufactured in a medical lab. The one on the right is illicitly manufactured, and only fentanyl. It is fentanyl pressed into a pill. The one on the right is more than 100 times more potent than the one on the left. And so when we start to think about the risk, one pill can kill you because you don't know what is in that pill. If we go on to what do we do about this, we have to do things now and consistently moving forward. We have to educate the public that this one pill can kill, that it is not, well, I'll try one today and then maybe it'll be fine. It's not. You will end up in my emergency department, and many times you will end up dead. You cannot take illicitly manufactured drugs. It is too dangerous right now. Even if you're like, well, I've used these a couple of times in the past, it doesn't matter. The risk now is different than it used to be. We need to make sure that everybody assumes that illicitly manufactured fentanyl has contaminated any illicit drug, whether they're using a vape cartridge with THC, whether they think they're taking Xanax, whether they think they're taking other drugs. They have to assume that we have illicitly manufactured fentanyl inside of that drug. We need to have rapid naloxone availability. And for fentanyl overdoses specifically, it needs to be administered as quickly as possible and may need repeated higher doses to reverse it. So if you think someone is overdosed on fentanyl and you give them a single dose of naloxone, continue to give them doses if you have them to reverse that. We need to make sure that people realize that a fentanyl test strip is not perfect. It can be helpful if it's positive, but if it's negative, maybe you've scraped off the wrong side of this illicitly manufactured pill. And if that's the case, it may show negative, but it doesn't mean that it's negative. If it's positive, yes. If it's negative, we don't know for sure because of the way in which these pills are manufactured and the way in which all of the system is contaminated, and you may miss that one little piece. So moving forward, we have to look on things like the Fentanyl Awareness Day, May 10th. Get involved in your counties and be included in this. And go through the fentanylawarenessday.org website so that it'll give you more specific and consistent things in your own county. And then because this is such a big deal, we're going to be putting on a webinar on opioids, fentanyl, and xylazine on June 3rd. Please email us if you're interested, and we'll be happy to get you more information. This is the biggest issue that we're dealing with at this point in time with overdose. Please listen to this and do the right things.